Trigger warning. If you are offended by alcohol abuse, vomit, blasphemy, descriptions of male genitalia, the objectification of sex workers, or humiliation, then you probably want to turn back now. If not, welcome to Doghead, a novel published a chapter at a time in audiobook format to music. Chapter 1, Never Been on a Big Job. It was just before midnight on a Sunday, and Jamie Bell was staggering down Church Street. He was beyond drunk, in fact, he was absolutely sozzled, feet snapping at the pavement like two dogs after the same bone, alcohol sending them poor instructions, telling them to freestyle a little, and that was not good for Jamie, who had two left feet and the rhythmic prowess of a gimp pigeon. So he bounced off walls and rebounded off lampposts, shuffling himself straight in between until he had an overwhelming and sudden urge to vomit. Does everyone try to fight that urge, especially after one too many Swifties? Well, that's what Jamie did for a good 30 seconds. He took some deep breaths, bargained with his inner workings, pleaded with that egg and cress sandwich, the last thing he'd eaten, and with the 7 pints of Fosters and 2 Sambucas, to stay where they were, to settle in and make themselves at home. He fought it until the last second, and then whoosh, he projectile vomited onto the church wall, a twinkling rainbow of half-digested food and alcohol. "Sorry about that, God," he muttered, stringy spit dangling from his chin. The pubs were all closed at that time, early licensing hours cutting short everyone's buzz. Most people had left for home, or if they were lucky, someone else's home, but Jamie was never one of those lucky ones. He was far too ugly for that, and he wasn't brave enough to stay behind with the other ugly people either, to have fights and vent the frustration of rejection on his own people. Usually he'd retreat quietly back to his gaff, trying his best not to be noticed, like a ghost browsing the shelves of an empty library at night. But that Sunday he'd decided he wasn't going to surrender to his physical limitations. Ugly people had to learn to adapt in every area of life, he decided, had to think of ways of getting what they wanted, had to be smart and creative. That's why the best looking person in any company was never the most senior. In fact, beautiful people hardly ever rose through the ranks of a company. They eventually quit, tired of being harassed by the bog-eyed, the pug-nosed, the gummy, the gaunt, or the so-called big-boned. They threw in the towel and started their own company, or married someone who already had one, leaving people like Jamie, the ugly people, to scrap it out amongst themselves. So in a bold attempt to buck the natural order and to get himself some action at the end of a night of boozing, Jamie was on his way to visit a prostitute, and that's why he was so drunk that Sunday. He'd stockpiled Dutch courage in preparation, no excuses this time. He was going to smash her all over the place, give her the best 3 to 4 minutes of her working life. At least that was his plan. But then a little anxiety crept in through the drunkenness. He turned to make sure nobody was watching what he was up to. His vision was shaky, but he could still make out a few stragglers on the street. Too far away though, no chance they could recognise him. Not that anybody cared, Jamie was clear on that too. He was probably the loneliest man in Preston, always alone in rooms filled with people, sat at crowded bars shoulder to shoulder with folk who didn't know he was there, couldn't care if he was dead or alive. But he was the manager of a popular restaurant in town, which was just around the corner from the pubs he could see in the distance, and he'd be mortified if any of his regulars clocked him sneaking off for a quick shag with a brass. He turned back towards his goal, could see the post box a few drunken meters up the road, knew that's where he had to turn, and from there he was a minute or two from where he'd seen her. His feet were back in some kind of order, less alcohol was sloshing about inside him, but acid bubbled up his gullet, burning his throat, meaning he had to spit a lot in order to get some relief. He'd stumbled across the place when he was heading back from the bowling alley a few days earlier. Jamie didn't particularly like bowling, thought it was a representation of all that was wrong with masculinity, thought it was brutish, bordering on the violent, but the staff in there were all students from UCLan and more often than not fine-looking young ladies. Must be the hiring policy, he often thought to himself. The prostitute had shocked him half to death when she'd appeared, wearing mustard yoga pants, a fake fur coat, fringe cut harshly, giving her the look of a sexy Vulcan and one with the peachiest of behinds. He doubted his eyes when he saw her, and when she'd whispered hello, he couldn't believe his ears either. There was broken glass all over the floor, sweet wrappers, empty crisp packets and crushed drinks cans. A typical Northern English shit tip of a yard, he thought, but one with this flash of beauty with bright lippy and long electric blue nails, hugging the corner of a wall, big boots that matched her coat. "Hello," she'd repeated, "are you looking for something?" Jamie knew exactly what she meant, which filled him with pride. It wasn't exactly Enigma Code levels of complexity, but Jamie had never mixed in criminal circles. "What do you mean?" he'd asked, pretending not to understand, to be an innocent and law-abiding man, every drop of blood in his body rushing to his genitals. "Something," she'd repeated, gesturing with her right hand, tongue bulging her left cheek. Now Jamie was the wrong shape for most clothing brands, tapering from the feet up, round about the middle, moobs and skinny arms. He had a tiny nubbin of a penis which poked straight out when hard. A longer one might have snaked down a trouser leg, but that wasn't the case, and so his erections when they happened in public were more prominent than other people's, meaning he often found himself having to hide his shameful displays of arousal with items of clothing or by adopting unnatural standing positions. No, he'd stammered. "I'm quite all right, thank you. I'm just lost, took a wrong turn, that's all. Not looking for anything." "Don't be nervous," she had said, pushing off the wall, walking his way. "It looks like you definitely want something." She'd nodded towards his trouser tent. Feeling a panic attack about to tear through him, he'd turned, marched out of there with a rabbit's hind legs hammering the inside of his chest. His thoughts were bright and violent, attacking him from every angle. Sex with a beautiful prostitute, being caught by the police, his mum finding out, losing his job, being publicly shamed, having an amazing orgasm. He'd turned that march into a pre-jog and got away from there, from her, as quickly as he possibly could. But that's where he was heading back now, this time with a skin full of confidence. A breeze ruffled his clothes, he shivered, maybe out of fear because he mumbled to himself, "Is this the right way?" meaning the right way home, convincing himself he was lost, that people could be watching. He was in the movie of his own life. The bricks that made up the house on the corner where the postbox stood were a funny shade of orange, like pulsing lava. He gave them a touch, a light tap at first, but they were stone cold, which felt odd. He ran his hand along them as he made his way up that side street. The texture, a rough trail, felt pleasant on his palm, reminded him of being a child for some reason. He revelled in that sensation until it abruptly stopped and he hit thin air, and he was at the entrance to that area, the one covered in glass, where he'd seen her a few days before. He took a deep breath, blew dust from his drunken vision. Everything became a little sharper. The place wasn't as decrepit as he'd remembered. The moon and the light coming from a street lamp outside the entrance cut the floor with shadows and a galaxy of sparkling shards of glass. He got a sense of how well built the walls were, the bricks well laid, resistant against all manner of attack or neglect, wrapping a scene from a painting, a contemporary masterpiece, a revelatory allegory about the state of modern Britain. And then she appeared, suddenly from across the yard, wearing the same fake fur boots and all, the mustard yoga pants, the harshly cut fringe, the nails. Her coat was open, revealing 2 large breasts. The lighting gave her an air of sophistication, he thought, but that could have been the booze. But either way, this was no backstreet prosy. She was the protagonist of the aforementioned painting, the reason artists existed. He knew next to nothing about art, but could imagine an old French painter, the kind that smoked 60 a day and lusted after his cousins. She leant a shoulder into the corner of the wall, crossed her legs, eyes twinkling with floor stars, that Vulcan hairstyle looking very much at home. "What are you looking for?" she whispered. He couldn't speak. The painting changed, darker hues, a lot more surreal. She went out of focus, so he shook his head trying to sharpen her back up, desperate for her to take control, to tell him exactly what to do. He'd have done anything she wanted at that moment, but he had no idea how to convey this to her. Sensing him struggle, probably having seen it many times before, she pushed off the wall, scanned him from head to toe. What have I got here, she must have been asking herself. Satisfied she knew, she crunched across the yard confidently, right up to Jamie's face. "How much money you got?" she asked, grabbing a handful of his cock and balls, breath smelling like oil paint and cigarettes. "Let me check," said Jamie, feeling more confident now that she had taken the initiative, scrambling a hand into his pocket. But she squeezed, forcing his eyes closed and his mouth to hang agape, sending him into that other place, that rarefied zone of one and only I, where everything aligned to satisfy his one big need, where time held its breath and nothing really mattered. She rummaged in his pocket, pulled out his wallet. "Is that all you've got?" she demanded, holding up a £10 note. Yes, he said, worried he'd ruined everything, had come all that way, taken all that risk, only to leave without the reward. I forgot to go to the cash point," he whimpered. "All right," she whispered, pocketing the note, moving her face to within millimeters of his. "We can work something out." "Thank God," he said, eyes rolling once again to the back of his head as she again grabbed the handful and squeezed. He was lost in her forest, off the beaten track without a compass. She was all he had and all he wanted. "How about I give you a penguin job," she said, giving everything a little twist. "You'd like that, love." Some drool came out of the side of his mouth. He slurped it back in. "Yes, please," he begged. "Okay," she said, running those nails down his torso, crouching to crotch height. Jamie moaned as she undid his belt, popped the trouser button. His whole being and all matter and energy focused on his genitals. Planets could have been colliding around him, stars exploding, the fabric of the universe tearing right down Church Street, and he wouldn't have noticed a thing. He was desperate to feel her hands on his penis, for her to touch it, cradle it, and to cup his balls. "Are you ready?" she asked, and Jamie Bell definitely was. This is my big bang, he thought, the beginning of a new era in my universe, one exciting and filled with sexual encounters. And she was the catalyst, the mother superior. But then she whipped his trousers down to his ankles, sprung to her feet and ran away, vanishing around the corner, leaving Jamie Bell waddling about the glass-covered yard like a penguin.